Thank you, Chair. And I refer the committee to my register of interest, where I'm a member of the Dale Trust, which is Rochdale Supporters Trust. I'm a lifelong Rochdale fan and season ticket holder. You say, David, your priorities for your first year will be rooted in the right decision taken early about people, budget and outreach. What does the right decision mean to you?
Well, I think the right decision, Mr. Waugh, is decisions that actually have a direct effect on action. I mean, I think actually what the regulator has to be is highly proactive. We need to be extremely goal-focused and actually doing the things we say we're going to do. And I also have quite a strong view, actually, on how the regulator should be working with clubs such as Rochdale. I mean, one of the things that one has seen as other regulators have operated in areas of sort of the arts is when you are a very small organisation with very few staff and you suddenly have a regulator bearing down on you, we talk about proportionality of budget, of the levy. Actually, I think proportionality of bureaucracy is another really big issue within the world of football. And I was talking to Mr. Pearce of the National League about this 2 days ago. So when we talk about the right decisions, I mean decisions that are actually going to be effective, that are going to have a direct impact on making sure that the very, very clear train lines that are set out in this bill are met. And as we go along, being able to demonstrate in a completely transparent way to you and to your constituents and to fellow members of the Supporters Trust of Rochdale Football Club, AFC, that we are doing the right job. And there will be bumps along the way, there always are. But actually, I think a rigorous sense of achievement and delivery and transparency will be what I regard as the right set of decisions.
Well, you neatly preempted my questions about proportionality of both the levy and bureaucracy, but can I ask you a little bit more about the levy then? Do you expect the Premier League clubs will shoulder the vast majority of the cost of that levy?
Well, can I just say a couple of things about process around the levy, which I think might be helpful. As you'll be aware, at the moment, the department by the Treasury is paying for the costs of the shadow regulator. I actually don't know what those costs are. One of the things that's interesting about the levy is not only is the levy there about future monies for the regulator, it's also there to pay back the Treasury and government for the monies that have already been spent. Now, I have no idea what we're talking about there in terms of scale, because I don't know what the numbers are. But I actually do believe, and the proportionality is built into this, that you can't, and it's clear within the legislation, you can't actually get to the point of levy without having gone through the licensing regime. The levy is defined here as being levied on all 116 clubs, all 116 licensed clubs. You can't do the levy until you've done the licensing. So we're going to go through a process of 116 clubs being licensed under the football governance statement from the government and under the corporate governance statements of the regulator before we can even get to a point of the levy. Now, how we then decide to levy is a matter of both public negotiation, as you'll be aware. It all has to be done through public consultation, and it has to be proportionate, and it has to be sensible. And I do think that it's a bit early for me to answer the question of how we're going to do that, since we haven't even started licensing clubs yet. I've also no doubt that you and others will be, in the course of the next period of time as we're doing it, we'll be asking this question repeatedly, and the more evidence we get and the more knowledge we get, the more we'll be able to come up with a precise answer.
Well, the logic of you stressing the proportionality is that the Premier League clubs are disproportionately more wealthy, and therefore they will be paying more.
Well, it's not me who's stressing proportionality, it's actually the bill, as you know. It is implicit and explicit within the bill. I suppose what you're really asking me is, do I agree with the premise of that? And the answer is, I do.
Yeah. And if the Premier League have any pushback to that, have you got any experience in trying to get people like that on board? Yeah,
I mean, I spent 26 years in football, both agreeing and disagreeing with people and getting people and negotiating. I mean, I am a negotiator by training and by trade, and I think that the Premier League, as I said earlier, and I've noticed recent statements in briefing notes that have been put out by the Premier League and its constituent clubs clearly have a view about the regulator and about regulation. And one of the things that's interesting actually about the Select Committee session in January 2024, in which Dr. Huck and the Chair were both I think now the only members who were on that committee, is when you watch it, which I did on Sunday for 2 hours, there are two things that really come out of it. And one is The statement by Richard Masters, this was in January of 2024, that it was the first and top priority of the Premier League to reach an agreement with the EFL on future financing of football. Well, here we still are. So I think actually, when it comes to the whole point, and you haven't asked about the backstop, but when it comes to the whole point about agreements within the world of football about the levy, when it comes to agreements between the various leagues in football, there has been a lot of thinking done about this. There's been a lot of talk about it, and nobody's been prepared to act because this has taken as long as it has. I think once the regulator exists, that changes that paradigm, and I look forward to those discussions, knowing all the individuals. I have the advantage of knowing Mr. Parry, I have the advantage of knowing Mr. Birch, Mr. Craig from the EFL, and I have the advantage of knowing Mr. Masters and his colleagues at the Premier League. I look forward to the discussions we're all going to have together, and I'm sure that rational thinking will pertain.
You've clearly done your homework and you're a bit of a stato like any football fan. But are you concerned that some of these additional costs from the levy will be passed on to fans in any way by some clubs? That's a concern.
Well, I hope not, but because the levy, as I said earlier, the levy has actually got a number of potential components, and we don't know what they're going to be. I mean, there is obviously the cost of the regulator. There's obviously the historic costs that have already been spent. Don't know what those are. The regulator has been designed to be light touch, but actually more than that, it's been designed to be a relatively lightweight bureaucracy and a lightweight structure. We also don't know. I was very interested actually reading the FA's annual report recently, where one of the risks that the FA identifies is the rising tide of legal action and within the world of football. And obviously, every decision that is taken as a consequence of this bill by the regulator is going to have a multitude, no doubt, of potentially litigious clubs and lawyers looking at what we do. So we have to be absolutely watertight in what we do. But clearly, we may have to bear costs of legal actions that we can't forecast. So there are different elements here, some of which are actually potentially provoked by the world of football, that I hope we can mitigate before we actually run into those problems.
Can I ask you a little bit then further about the disproportionate compliance burden on smaller clubs, and you've referred to it already. National League clubs, you know, they're lucky if they've got a handful of backroom staff who are not playing staff, and they're going to have to deal with this new regulator. Obviously, they've got concerns. I mean, will the regulator do anything at all to ensure that those clubs have support, maybe even financial support, to help cope with that burden?
I can't stress how delighted I am you've asked that question, because one of the things that I have said consistently in this process is not only do I want the burden of regulation on small clubs with few employees to be as minimal as possible, I actually want the regulator, I don't think they'd thought of this, to have a help desk built within it. Those of us who run businesses, you know, one of the things that I'm personally obsessed about is what used to be called the 3-ring rule. 3-ring rule is when somebody phones your business and the phone isn't answered after 3 rings. These days, it's the 3-email rule. Somebody sends an email, gets no response for a week, drives me crazy. What I want this regulator to be able to do is have a help desk and have a ways whereby we're not seen as being a cop in the world of football, we're seen as being an asset to the world of football. So that when we're asking perfectly legitimate questions about 3-year business plans and financing and liquidity and the role of the owner, this is the burden that we will put on clubs in terms of licensing. At the same time, we're saying to clubs such as Rochdale, if you do not have the accounting practices that allow you to answer this, we will supply those to you. If you do not have an understanding of what we're trying to do, we will send a team to you. One of the interesting bits of journalism I picked up on when preparing for this role is a really interesting article about Lincoln City. A team from the Shadow Regulator went to Lincoln City 3 or 4 weeks ago to talk to them about how a regulator would work with Lincoln City. And it's very interesting that I think it's Mr. Scully, who's the chairman, talked about how refreshing it was that they had regulators there who are actually learning how a team like a club like Lincoln City could work with that regulator. Well, I think that is a model, in terms of outreach, in terms of consultation, but also a model about the way we should be working. I would hope in a year from now, you will all have stories about how the regulator has, instead of imposing itself on clubs, has actually assisted clubs to allow us to do our work properly. And of the 116 licenses, I'm hoping most of them will be extremely smooth.